In this course, I'm going to teach you everything you need to know to get started programming in Python. Now, Python is one of the most popular programming languages out there, and it's by far one of the most sought after for jobs. And so if you're trying to get a job, or you're trying to, automate your life, or you're trying to write awesome scripts to do a bunch of different things, then Python's for you. Honestly, more and more developers every day are moving their projects over to Python because it's such a powerful and it's such an easy to use language. A lot of programming languages out there just aren't very beginner friendly. There's a lot of syntax, there's a lot of little things that if you get wrong, the program will yell at you. Python is the complete opposite of that. You basically just type out what you want to do and Python does it. It's that simple. There's not a whole lot of syntax to learn, and the learning curve is literally zero. You jump in, you can start writing your first program in seconds. In this course, I'm going to teach you guys everything you need to know to get started in Python. I designed this course especially for Python, and each lesson has been specially designed with examples that will help you along the way. With so many people starting to learn Python, the question isn't why should you learn Python? The question is why shouldn't you? And I think for a lot of people, the reason they might not want to learn Python is because they're intimidated or they're afraid that it's going to be too hard. Trust me, I am going to hold your hand through this entire course. We're going to talk about all the core concepts in Python. We're going to look at everything you need to know to start programming in Python and start being confident and start writing scripts and start writing programs that are awesome and doing cool things in your life. Anyway, I'm super pumped to be teaching you guys Python. I can't wait to get started in this course, and I hope you guys stick around and follow along with the course and learn this amazing programming language. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you guys how to install Python onto your computer. And we're also going to install a text editor that we can use to write our Python programs in. So the first order of business is to actually install Python on your computer. So what we want to do is head over to our web browser, and you want to go over here to this page. It's just www.python.org/downloads. And on this page, there's going to be two buttons down here, and it's just going to say download Python 3.6.3. And at least that's the version that I have right now, or download Python 2.7.14. So here's the thing about Python. There's actually two major versions of Python that are in use currently. There's Python 2 and there's Python 3. So you can see over here, this is like 2.7.14. Basically any Python 2 version we would just refer to as like Python 2, and here's like the latest Python 3 version. And so there's these two versions that you can download, and the first thing we have to decide is which version do we want to download. And here's the basic difference. Python 2 is a legacy version of Python, which basically means that it's like an old version and it's not being like actively maintained or supported like officially by Python anymore. Python 3 is like the future of Python. It's like the newest version. It's the one that's getting actively maintained and supported. And so there's pros and cons to picking either one. A lot of people will say like Python 2 has been around longer, and so there's more like libraries. There's basically just more Python code written in Python 2. And so therefore, like there's a few more things that you can do in Python 2 than you can do in Python 3. But then again, Python 2 is not supported, and 5 or 10 years from now, probably no one's going to be using it. Python 3, like I said, is like the future of Python. It's the newest version. It's the one that is sort of being maintained going forward. So for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm going to be teaching you guys Python 3. So we're going to want to download Python 3. Now, here's the thing. Like, if you learn Python 3 or you learn Python 2, the differences aren't very big. There are a few differences in like some syntax and just some, little things here and there. But if you learn Python 3, you'll be able to jump right in and code in Python 2 as well. Don't let anyone, tell you that you have to learn one or the other. We're going to learn Python 3 just because it's, I think, probably the best for a beginner to learn. And so that's the one that we want to download. So I'm just going to click download Python 3, and we're going to go ahead and download this version. And when that's done downloading, I'm just going to head down to my downloads folder. And you'll see here we just have this file. I'm just going to double click, and we get this like Python installer. So I'm just going to click through here, and we'll be able to install Python 3 on our computer. All right, when that's done installing, we can just close out of this and we should be good to go. So now we have Python 3 installed on our computer. The next step is we need to choose a text editor. So we're going to be writing a bunch of code. So we're going to need some, environment or some program that we can write all that code in. And really, you can write Python in any text editor. You could write it in like Notepad or TextEdit. It doesn't really matter. But there are special text editors that are designed just for writing Python code. And these are called IDEs, and that stands for Integrated Development Environment. It's basically just a special environment where we can, run and execute our Python code, and it'll, basically like tell us how we're doing. So if we're, if we write something that's wrong or we have errors, it'll kind of point us in the right direction of what we need to do to fix that stuff. So in this course, we're going to be using an IDE, and one of my favorites and one of the most popular IDEs for Python is called PyCharm. So I'm over here on this website. It's called jetbrains.com/PyCharm. And this is the IDE that we're going to be using in this course. So I'm just going to come over here and click this big download now button. And we'll go ahead and download this PyCharm program. All right, so I'm getting this page over here. You can see there's two versions of PyCharm. One is a professional version, and that one's like paid, so you have to pay for it. But then there's this community version down here, and that's free and open source. So I'm just going to download this one. And this should have everything we need to get started using Python. All right, when that finishes downloading, I'm just gonna pull that up in my downloads folder. And again, we can just sort of run this guy. And I'm on a Mac, so I'm gonna have to drag it over to my applications folder. All right, so we now have PyCharm and we have Python 3 installed on our computer. So we're ready to start programming in Python. In this tutorial, we're going to create our first Python program, and we're going to be able to run it and see how everything works. The first thing I want to do is open up PyCharm. So PyCharm was the IDE, the Integrated Development Environment that we downloaded in the last tutorial. So I'm just going to go ahead and search for it on my computer, and I can just open it up. And when we first open up PyCharm, we should basically just get a window prompting us to create a project. So you can see that down here. Actually, the first thing I want to do though is come over here to configure, and I'm just gonna click on preferences, and I actually want to change the appearance. So I'm gonna go ahead and give this a theme. So I just went over here to appearance and behavior, appearance, and I'm gonna change the theme to Darkula, just because I think it's a little bit easier to use and look at. But you don't have to do that if you don't want to. And so down here, I'm just gonna click create new project. And it's gonna give us this little window right here, so I can just name my project, and I'm just gonna name this draft. And then there's this other option down here where it says interpreter. Now, what we wanna select is Python version 3. So if I click down here, you'll notice that there's a couple different options. So I'm on a Mac computer, and by default, Mac has Python version 2 installed on it. If you're on a Windows machine, I'm not sure if it does, but in this tutorial, we're gonna be using Python 3. So you wanna make sure that you have Python 3 selected as the interpreter. Otherwise, you might not be able to fully follow along with what we're doing in this video. So now I'm just gonna come down here and click create, and this is gonna go ahead and create our project for us. All right, so now we have our Python project up and running, and I wanna show you guys how we can create our first Python program. So over here in this draft folder, and this is just that project that we created, I'm just gonna right click and I'm gonna say new, and I'm gonna come down and click Python file. So we wanna create a new Python file. This will be our first Python program. And I can just give this a name. So why don't we just call this app? And I'm just gonna click OK. All right, so now we have our first Python file open, and we can just start typing in some Python. So I wanna show you guys just a very basic Python program, and this is just gonna be a hello world program. So we're just gonna print something out onto the screen. So what I wanna do is I wanna type out print, print, and I wanna type in open and close parentheses. Now inside of this parentheses, we can make some quotation marks, and inside of the quotation marks, I'm just gonna type out hello world. So this is like a very basic Python program. And what this is gonna do is it's just gonna print out hello world onto the screen. And so now what I can do is I can actually run this file, and we're actually getting a little error here. It wants us to create a new line at the end of the file. And so now in order to run our Python program, I'm just gonna come up here to the top, and I'm just gonna click run, and we'll click this run button right here. And now we'll see what happens. So it's asking me what I want to run. I can just click app, And down here at the bottom, you'll notice that we have this text that just got printed out, hello world. And so whatever I print or whatever I put inside of this print statement is going to get printed out down below in the console. So as long as you're getting that print statement to work, then you've actually written your first Python program. And as we go forward in the course, we're going to be writing all sorts of awesome Python programs, and we're going to be doing all sorts of cool stuff. In this tutorial, I want to talk to you about writing a basic Python program. So we're going to write just a very simple Python program. We're going to look at how we can go ahead and write our programs. We're going to talk about how our programs are getting executed by Python. And we're also going to draw out a little shape onto the screen. So this is going to be pretty cool. I'm excited to talk to you guys about just the bare basics of Python and really just sort of give you an introduction. So over here, we have our basic text editor. And so any of the Python code that I write inside of this file is actually going to get executed by Python. So this Python file has a bunch of Python code inside of it. And basically what we're doing when we're programming in Python is we're just giving the computer a set of instructions, right? That's really what programming is. It's just like we're specifying a set of instructions and the computer is going to go off and execute those instructions that we give it. And so the more complex the instructions we give to the computer, the more complex the tasks the computer can carry out. So I want to show you guys how we can use some Python instructions or some Python code in order to draw out a shape onto the screen. So I'm actually going to draw out a little triangle. So over here, we can actually print something out onto the screen in Python using something called a print statement. So I can just type out print, and inside of these parentheses, I can just type some quotation marks, and inside the quotation marks we can put whatever we want to print out onto the screen. So I'm gonna copy this, and I'm actually gonna make a few of these little print statements, and we're gonna actually draw a shape. So we're gonna draw like a triangle type shape. So down here I'm just gonna draw a forward slash, and then up here I'll make a space and we'll do another forward slash. Here we'll make 2 spaces, we'll do another forward slash, and over here we're gonna make 3 spaces and a forward slash. And now I'm gonna draw like vertical bars going all the way down. And actually we can do some underscores here as well. That'd be kind of cool. All right, so now we have our triangle looking shape, and you can see it looks kind of like a right triangle. So I can save my file, and I can either come up here to run and click run app, or if you're using PyCharm, you can also just come over here and click this play button. And when I click the play button, I want you to notice what happens down here. So down here we have this little window, and this is called the console. And basically the console is just a place where Python is going to output some information. So when we use this print statement, we're basically telling Python like, hey, can you print something out onto the console? So there's a lot of situations where we're going to want to see what's going on in our code. And we can use that print statement and print things out to the console, and we can basically like have a little window into what our program's doing. In our case, we're just going to be printing out this triangle onto the console. So I'm going to come over here and click this play button, and you'll see down here we're actually printing out that triangle. So mission accomplished, we were able to print out our shape. So I could really draw any shape I wanted as long as I was able to specify it inside of these print statements. And so essentially what Python's doing when I click that play button is it's going into this file and it's looking at all of these instructions in order. So the first thing it does is it goes to this instruction and it says, okay, they want me to draw out these like little forward slash and this vertical bar onto the screen. Once it does that, it goes down to this instruction. It says, okay, they want me to print something out again. When it prints that out, it goes down to this instruction, etc. So Python is actually going to execute the lines of code that we write in order. So the order in which I write the instructions matters a lot. So for example, if I was to take this last line here and put it up here at the top, now when I save the file, instead of just drawing out that triangle, it's going to draw out this little upside down bottom thing at the top and then the rest of the triangle down here. So the order of the instructions actually matters a lot. And so this is basically how your Python programs are going to go. As we go through this course, we're going to learn more and more of these little lines. So here we're just using this little print function. Basically, it just prints something out onto the screen. There's a bunch of little things like this that we can learn, and as we go through, we'll learn more and more instructions that we can give to the computer. But in this lesson, I just want to kind of show you guys the basics, right? We can essentially just define these little instructions for the computer, and the computer will execute them in order. In this tutorial, I want to talk to you guys about using variables in Python. Now, in Python, you're going to be dealing with a lot of data. And so a lot of times in our program, we're going to be working with all types of information and data and values. And sometimes that data can be difficult to manage. So in Python, we have this thing called a variable, and it's basically just a container where we can store certain data values. And when we use a variable, when we put those data values inside containers, it makes it a lot easier for us to work with and manage all of the different data inside of our programs. So variables are extremely helpful, and it's sort of like a core topic in Python that you're really going to want to know and master. So in this tutorial, I'm going to teach you guys everything you need to know to get started with variables. We're going to look at what they are, why they're useful, and we'll look at the different types of variables and the different types of data that we can store inside of variables. So over here in my Python file, I just have a very simple program, and it's basically just printing some text out onto the screen. And so this is actually a little story that I wrote. It says, "There once was a man named George. He was 70 years old. He really liked the name George, but didn't like being 70. So this is a valid Python program. I could go ahead and run this program, and you'll see down here in the console, everything prints out and it looks great. So we have an awesome little Python program here. But let's say that inside of our story, I wanted to change the character's name. So instead of naming the character George, let's say I wanted to name the character John. Well, I'm going to have to go through and I'm going to have to manually change the name George to the name John at every place inside of this story where it's mentioned. So I'm going to have to go over here and I'll say, okay, John, I'm going to have to manually change that. And then, okay, down here, we're going to have to, again, manually type in John and change it to John. So in order to change the character's name, I had to manually go in and change it in both places. And now let's say, okay, maybe we want to change the character's age also. So in addition to changing the name, we also want to change the age. Let's make him a little bit younger. So why don't we say John is going to be 35. And so you'll see here I had to come here and manually change the age, and then come down here and manually change it again, right? And now that we changed it, like, it's going to work, it's going to be updated in our program. But you'll notice that in order to make that change, like, I had to look through the entire program, find where that value was, and change it. And this was only with 4 lines of the story. Imagine if I had a story that was like thousands of lines long, and we mentioned the character's name and age like hundreds of times. I mean, I'd have to look through each one of those lines and manually change the character's name. And that is not a very good way for us to do this. And it's really not a good way for us to manage the data in our program, right? The character's name and the age. And so we can actually use a variable in order to store the character's name and the character's age. And when we use that variable, it'll make it a lot easier for us to put the character's name and age inside of our little program here. So I'm going to show you guys how we can create a variable for the character's name and age. And I'm just going to go up here above this print statement. And up here, I want to create a variable. So when we create a variable in Python, we actually need to give Python a couple pieces of information. The first piece of information we need to give Python is the name of the variable. So I need to actually assign a name to this container where we're going to be storing information. And so all I have to do is just type out the name of the variable that I want to create. So I'm going to create a variable called character name. So I'm just going to say character, and I'm going to say underscore name. And so generally when you're creating a name for a variable in Python, you want to separate different words with an underscore. So I have 2 words here and I'm separating them with an underscore. And now what I need to do is I need to put a value inside of this variable. So basically what I can do is I can just say equals, and over here I can type a value. So I'm just going to type out the character's name inside of quotation marks. So we're just going to type out John. So now we have a variable for the character's name. And below this character name variable, I want to create another variable called character age. So I'm just going to type out character underscore age, and I'm gonna set this equal to the character's age, which is 35. So we now have two variables, one representing the character's name and one representing the character's age. So what I can do now is I can replace the character's name inside of the story with this variable. And I'm gonna show you guys how to do that. So if we wanna put a variable inside of this print statement, I'm actually gonna have to do a couple things. The first thing I'm gonna have to do is end off this text in here. So I'm gonna have to put a quotation marks here at the end, and you can see I'm basically wrapping this whole thing into a single like quoted line. And now I also have this text over here at the end, so I'm gonna have to put a quotation mark here. So now I have a bunch of text here in quotation marks, and then I also have text over here in quotation marks. Now inside of here, instead of saying the character's name, I wanna refer to that character name variable. So I'm just gonna say plus character underscore name, and I wanna say another plus sign. So I basically am saying I wanna print out all of this text plus the value that's stored inside of character name plus all of this text. And what this will do is it'll actually print out the character's name when we print this. So I'm gonna go ahead and run this program, and you'll see down here, and actually let me put a space over here, and we'll run it again. So you can see down here, we still are printing out there once was a man named John. And so what Python is doing is when it executes this line of code, it's coming over here and it's seeing, oh, okay, they wanna print out the value inside of character name. So Python's gonna go up here, it's gonna get the value, and it's gonna insert it inside of there. So I can basically do this for every instance of the character name in my file. So I can, I'll just copy this guy right here, and I can just paste it down here where the character's name is. So I'll paste this, and you can see now we're doing exactly the same thing that we did up there. I can also do this for the character's age. So I'm gonna come down here, and I'll paste in what we just pasted in, and I'm gonna change this, instead of character name, we'll change it to character age. And I'm gonna do this in one more spot, so we're gonna do this over here where we're mentioning the age, and again, I'll just change this to character age. And so now when I run this program, it's gonna print out the same story that we were printing out before, but now I don't actually have to type in the character's name and the character's age. I can just refer to this variable. And the cool thing about variables is if I wanted to change the character's name, now all I have to do is change it up here. So I could change the character's name to like Tom or something, and we could also change their age. So I could change the age to be like 50, and now that's gonna automatically update throughout our entire story. So when I click this play button, you'll see now we're using the name Tom, and he's 50 years old. So that's where variables can come in handy, and this can be a really awesome way to control and manage the data that's inside of our programs. With variables, you can also modify their values. So for example, let's say that halfway through the story, I wanted to change the character's name. Well, I can just make some new lines over here, and down here, I can actually assign a new value to one of these variables. So I could say like character underscore name, and in order to give it a different value, all I have to do is just say equals, and we'll give it a different value. So let's say halfway through the story, we want to change the character's name to Mike. Well, now when I run on my program, you'll see here in the first part of the story, it says there once was a man named Tom. And in the second part of the story, it's referring to the name as Mike. So I actually updated the variable inside of my program over here. And that's a really awesome way. A lot of times in these programs, you're gonna wanna be modifying the values of variables. And so you can do it just like that. And so finally, I wanna talk to you guys about the different types of data that we can store inside of these variables. So over here, I have the character name and the character age. And I'm actually storing what are called strings. So a string is basically just plain text, right? So the name Tom, that's just plain text. Down here, these guys are strings as well. So there's a data type in Python called a string, and it's just basically gonna store plain text. So, any text that you would have like in a story or, someone's name, you can store inside of a string. There's also another type of data that we can store inside of Python, which is numbers. So in addition to storing text, we can also store numbers. So if I wanted to store a number, for example, let's say we wanted to store the character age instead of inside of a string, we could store it inside of a number. So I could just type out 50. And when we're storing a number, we don't need these quotation marks. You only need that quotation mark when you're storing a string. So if I wanted to store a number, I can just write it out like this. And in addition to using whole numbers, I could also use decimal numbers. So I could say like 50.5678213. And Python's gonna be able to store that number as well. So you can store all different types of numbers. And we can also store what's called a Boolean value. And a Boolean value is essentially a true or a false value. And there's a lot of instances in programming where we're gonna wanna represent true or false data. For example, I could have a variable called like is male. And this would tell me whether or not someone was a male. And in my case, it would be true because I'm a guy, right? So I can, actually this needs to be capital. So I could store a value of either true or false. And actually, if we were naming this in Python, we'd want to use an underscore. So I would say is underscore male, and this can be either true or false. So true or false values is maybe not something that you're used to dealing with like in the real world, but in programming, we're going to be using true or false values all the time. They're super important. So like I said, there's three basic types of data that we can work with in Python. There's strings, which is just like plain text, numbers, which would be like either decimal numbers or whole numbers like this, and there's true or false values. And these are the basic types of data. I mean, there's a bunch of other types of data that we can use, but I would say 99% of the time as a new user and a new programmer to Python, you're just gonna be dealing with these three types of data. So those are the basics of the data, and also with variables, and you're gonna be using variables all the time in Python, so you definitely wanna practice up and get comfortable using them. In this tutorial, I wanna talk to you guys about working with strings in Python. Now, one of the most common types of data that we're gonna be working with in Python is gonna be strings. And strings are basically just plain text. So any text that we want to have inside of our program, we can store inside of a string. So I want to talk to you guys about all the cool things we can do with strings, and we're basically just going to get a full introduction into why strings are awesome. So over here, I'm just going to actually print out a string. So I'm just going to say print, and inside of these parentheses, I can type out a string. In order to create a string, I need to use quotation marks. So I can make an open and close quotation marks just like that. Now inside of the quotation mark, I can put whatever text I want the string to have. So we could say like Draft Academy. And so now we have a string with the text Draft Academy inside of it. So if I run my program, now down here, we're gonna print out Draft Academy, as you can see. And when we have these strings, there's actually a bunch of cool things that we can do with them. So one thing I could do would be to create a new line inside of the string. So if I wanted, I could come over here and I could say \n, and you can see it got highlighted in a different color. And what this is gonna do is it's actually gonna insert a new line into the string. So now it's gonna say draft on one line and academy on another line. So I'm gonna click play, and you'll see down here we just get Draft Academy. In addition to the \n, I could also use a / quotation mark. So if I wanted to put a quotation mark inside of my string, I can't just put a quotation mark like that, because Python's gonna think that I'm trying to end this string. So if I want to include a quotation mark, I can just use this special / character, and that's called the escape character, and it basically just tells Python that whatever character comes after it, we want to render literally. So when I say / quotation mark, it basically means like, hey Python, I want to print out a quotation mark. And so now we'll be able to print out a quotation mark right there. I can also use this to print out a \. So if I needed to print out a \, I could say / and it'll just print out a normal \ now. So you can see just like that. So if you want, you can use that \ to make new lines or print out quotation marks, or you can just use it as a normal \. In addition to just typing out a string here, I could also create a string variable. So I could come down up here and we can create a variable, and we'll just call it phrase. and I'm going to set it equal to Draft Academy. So I can store this string value inside of a variable called phrase, and then when I want to print out that variable, or I want to access that string variable, I can just type the name of the variable, and you'll see that it's going to print out the value that was stored inside of it. I can also use something called concatenation. And concatenation is basically the process of taking a string and appending another string onto it. So I could come over here and I could say phrase, and I could say plus, and now I can add in another string. So I could say like is cool. And now this is gonna say Draft Academy is cool. So I'm basically appending another string onto another one. They call that concatenation. And so in addition to doing all that stuff, we can also use special things called functions. And a function is basically just a little block of code that we can run, and it'll perform a specific operation for us. And so we can use functions to modify our strings, and we can also use functions to get information about our strings. So I'm going to show you guys a couple common functions we can use with these strings, and they're actually going to do awesome stuff. So in order to access one of these functions, I can just say phrase, and then I can say dot. And I'm going to show you guys a function that we can use to convert this string entirely into lowercase. So I could just say phrase.lower, and then I'm going to want to type in open and close parentheses. And this will take this phrase, it'll take my string, and it'll convert it to lowercase. So you can see now we just have Draft Academy down here, but it's entirely in lowercase. I could also do the same thing for uppercase. So I could say phrase.upper, and this will convert the entire string into uppercase. So you can see now it's entirely uppercase. So in addition to converting the string into uppercase and lowercase, I could also check to see if a string is entirely uppercase or entirely lowercase. So for example, I could say phrase.isUpper, and this is going to give me back a true or a false value. So it's going to be true if the string is entirely uppercase, or false if it's not. And you can see here we're getting a false value because this isn't uppercase. I can also use these functions in combination with each other. So for example, I could say phrase.upper, and then a parentheses, and then after this I could say .isUpper. And now what it's gonna do is it's gonna run this upper function, it's gonna convert it into uppercase, and then it's gonna run this isUpper function right after that, and you'll see now we're gonna get a true value back because it will have converted the whole thing into uppercase. So you can see now we're getting a true value. So you can use these functions one after another. It can be really useful. And there's a few other ones that I wanna show you. So we can also figure out the length of this string. So if I wanted to figure out how many characters were inside of this string, I could just say len, and I'm actually gonna make an open parentheses, and I'm gonna make a close parentheses. So I'm essentially saying len, and this is another function, it's the length function. And inside of this len function, I'm actually passing this phrase variable. I'm basically giving the length function this, and it's gonna spit out a number. So it'll tell me how many characters are inside of this string. And so you can see here we get 15 because there's 15 characters inside of Draft Academy. So that's how we can get the length of a string, and that's gonna be really useful as we go forward in Python. We can also get individual characters inside of a string. So imagine if I wanted to just grab one of these characters. Like imagine if I wanted to figure out what the first character in this string is. Well, I can actually use an open and closed square bracket just like that. And in here, I can specify the index of the character that I want to grab. So if I wanted to grab the first character in this string, I can put in a 0. So if I say phrase square bracket 0, this is going to give me that capital G. And you can see down here, that's what gets printed out. Now I want to point something out. In Python, when we're working with strings, a string gets indexed starting with 0. So you'll notice that in order to access this G, I had to put a 0 in here. And that's because in Python, when we use indexes on a string, we start with 0. So if Python is counting the characters, or it's indexing the characters in a string, it's gonna start with 0. So it's gonna say G is 0, I is 1, R is 2, A is 3. So we would say that G is at position 0 in the string, I is at position 1, R is at position 2, A is at position 3, etc. So we start counting at 0. So if I wanted to access the first character in the string, this G, I have to say phrase 0. And that's just a special thing in Python. And actually, most programming languages do that. So they'll start with 0. So for example, if I wanted to access this A, I'm going to have to put 0, 1, 2, 3. So if I put 3 inside of here, now we'll be able to access that first A. As you can see, we get an A right here. So this is actually really useful, being able to grab a specific character inside of a string, and you're going to be using that a lot as we go forward in Python. There's also another really awesome function that we can use, and it's called the index function. And basically what the index function will do is it'll tell us where a specific character or string is located inside of our string. So I could say phrase.index, and I can actually give this a value. So sometimes when we use these functions in Python, we can actually give them information. So I can give this a value. And we would call this passing a parameter. So I would call a value that I would give to a function a parameter. And you'll hear that word a lot. So for example, I could say inside of here, capital G, and now this is gonna return the index of the capital G inside of our string. So it should give us back a 0 because G is at the 0th index. And you'll see down here that we get a 0 because that's where G is. So for example, if I put an A inside of here, like a lowercase a, it should give me 0, 1, 2, 3, because that's where the first A is inside of this string. So I can click the play button, and you'll see it's giving us a 3. You can also put actual words in here. So for example, I could put like academy in here, or I could even just put like ACAD, and this is gonna tell me where this starts inside of my string. So when I click play, it's gonna give me an 8 because that's where academy starts, right? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If I put something in here that wasn't in the string, so for example, if I put a Z in here, that's not in here, it's actually gonna throw an error. So when I play this, you'll see that we get this error down here because Z is not found inside of our program. So that index function, again, can be really useful, and we'll be using that a lot. There's also one more that I wanna show you, which is called replace. So we can say phrase.replace, and in here, I can actually give this 2 parameters. So I can give this replace function 2 values that it can use. And the first thing I want to give it is what I want to replace. So for example, I could say giraffe, and then I'm gonna put a comma in here, and I wanna put in here what I wanna replace giraffe with. So I could just say like elephant, and now instead of saying Giraffe Academy, this is gonna print out Elephant Academy. So you can see down here, it just says Elephant Academy. So this replace function can be really awesome because we can replace certain words or even certain letters inside of our strings with other ones. So those are just some basic ways that we can work with strings inside of Python. And there's a lot of these different functions that we can use with strings. These are some of the most common, the ones that I just showed you right now. But if you just do a Google search, you can find all sorts of Python functions that you can try out and use and see what they do. But you definitely want to get comfortable working with strings in Python because you're going to be working with them a lot. In this tutorial, I want to talk to you about working with numbers in Python. Now, numbers are one of the most common data types in Python, and any Python program you write is most likely going to be dealing with numbers at some point. So I want to talk to you guys about just the basics of using numbers. We're going to talk about the different types of numbers that we can represent in Python. And I also want to show you guys some awesome functions that we can use with numbers. So we can do certain like mathematical operations. We can do some awesome things with numbers. I'm going to show you guys all of that in this video. It's going to be awesome. So first thing we can do is we can actually just like print out a number. So if I want to write a number in Python, it's really easy. I basically just write the number. So I could say like print 2, and this is just going to print the number 2 out onto the screen. So I can use a whole number like this. I could also use a decimal number. So I could say like 2.0987. And Python's gonna be just fine with that. We'll be able to print that out onto the screen as well. I can also make numbers negative. So I could make this 2.0987 a negative number, and Python will be able to handle that just fine too. In Python, we can also use basic arithmetic. So I could do things like addition, subtraction, multiplication. So I could say like 3 plus 4. And now this is going to print this out. Or why don't we say like 3 plus 4.5. And this will be able to print out the answer, so we get 7.5. And we can do addition, we could do subtraction, we could do division, or we could do like multiplication as well. So you can pretty much do whatever you want inside of Python. And if you want to make more complex mathematical equations, we can also use things to specify order of operations. So I could use parentheses. So for example, if I said 3 times 4 plus 5, what Python's going to do is it's going to multiply 3 and 4 together. So it's going to be 12, and then we'll add 5 to that. So we should get 17. But let's say that we wanted to change up the order, right? I could actually put a parentheses around 4 and 5. And now it's going to add them first. So it'll add 4 and 5. So we'll get 9, and we'll multiply that times 3. So we should end up with 27. So you can see we can use those parentheses to specify order of operations. So I could make like a very complex little equation here just by using numbers and parentheses. We can also use one other operation, which is called the modulus operator. So I could say like 10 and use this percent sign 3. And this is actually read 10 mod 3. And basically what this is going to do is it's going to take the first number, divide it by the second number, and it's going to spit out the remainder. So it's basically going to say, okay, 10 divided by 3, that's going to be 3 with a remainder of 1. And so this is going to give us the remainder. And you'll see down here we get 1 because that's the remainder of 10 divided by 3. And that modulus operator can come in handy quite a bit. We can also store these numbers inside of variables. So we can store them inside of these variable containers. So I could come over here and I could create a variable called like my_num, and we'll just store a value of, let's say like 5 in here. And so I could come down here and I can just print out my_num, and we'll be able to print that number out to the screen just fine. So in addition to doing things like a basic arithmetic, we can also do some other stuff. So one thing I could do is I could actually convert this number into a string. So if I wanted to convert this number into a string, I can just say str, and I can put the number that I want to convert inside of these parentheses. And so what's going to happen now is this number is going to be converted into a string. So when I click the run button, you'll see it's just printing out 5, but now instead of being a number, this is actually a string. And this is going to come in handy when you want to print out numbers alongside strings. So I can come over here and I can say like my favorite number, and we'll be able to print this number along with this string. So I can click play and it says 5, my favorite number. If I was to get rid of this string right here and I wasn't converting the number into a string, now Python's going to have a problem with this. It's not going to allow us to do that. You can see we get an error. So anytime you want to print out a number next to a string, you got to make sure that you use that little string function. So there's a bunch of other stuff that we can do with numbers, and a lot of times in Python, you're going to want to be using specific, like more advanced math operators. So there's a bunch of different math functions that we can use on our numbers. And a function is basically just like a little collection of code that does something. So a function could perform an operation like a mathematical operation on our number. It could also give us information about our number. So I'm going to show you guys some of the most common functions that you'll be using in Python related to numbers. The first one is called ABS, and it stands for absolute value. So we can get the absolute value of a number. And so over here, I'm just going to make this variable -5. And basically, I can just say ABS, and I can make an open and close parentheses over here. And this is going to give me the absolute value of this number up here. So when I click the play button, you'll see it's just giving us 5, because 5 is the absolute value of -5. I can use a few other functions. There's another one which is called POW. It's just POW. And I'm actually not going to use this variable. We just use a normal number. And this function is going to allow us to pass it 2 pieces of information. So I can give this function 2 pieces of information. The first is going to be like a number, and the second is going to be the power that I want to take that number to. So I could say like 3, 2, and this is basically just going to be 3 raised to the power of 2. So it's just gonna be 3 squared, so we should get 9 down here. You can see that we do. So I could pass in like, you know, some crazy number, like we could pass in a 4 and we could raise it to the power of 6. And so we should get like a pretty big number here. And you can see we get 4,096. So this pow function is really useful for taking numbers to specific powers. So in addition to using this pow function, we can also use another function which is called max. So I can say max, and what this is gonna do is it's basically gonna return the larger of the two numbers that we pass into it. So right now I'm giving this a 4 and a 6, and this should tell us which number is higher. So over here, it's just printing out 6 because that's the bigger number. I can also use another function called min, and this is gonna do the opposite. So now instead of printing out the max number, it's gonna print out the smallest number, and it's gonna print out 4 down here, as you can see. Another cool function is called the round function, and this is gonna allow us to round a number. So it's just gonna follow like standard rounding rules. So if I said like 3.2 inside of here, now it's gonna round it down to just normal 3. But if I said like 3.7, it's gonna round it up to 4. So that'll allow you to round a number. So there's a few other functions that I wanna show you guys, but in order to get access to them, I'm actually gonna have to do something called importing. And in Python, we can actually import external code into our files. And so if I wanna access these specific math functions, I have to import something called Python math. So I can just say from up here, math, import, and this star. And basically what this is gonna do is it's gonna go out and it's gonna grab a bunch of different math functions that we can use. So I already showed you guys a few of these different math functions, but there's actually a bunch more. And in order to access them, we're gonna need to include this line of code inside of our file. So once we have that, now I can access a few others. So there's another function which is called the floor method, and it's just floor. And what this will do is it'll basically just grab the lowest number. So it's essentially just gonna chop off this decimal point. And you can see over here now we get a 3 because we're using that floor function. There's also another one called ceil, and that's just gonna do the exact opposite. So that's just gonna round the number up no matter what. So no matter what, we'll always get 4 if we have a 3 point whatever here. And there's another one which is called square root. So it's just sqrt. And essentially this is just gonna return the square root of a number. So I could say like 36, and now we should get 6 back. So those are all some very interesting functions. And inside of this math module, so we would call this a module, and you don't have to worry too much about what that is right now. Just know that when we put this line of code into our program, it gives us access to a lot more math functions. So it basically allows us to do a lot more things with math inside of our program. And there's a bunch of different math functions in Python. And if you want, you can basically just go online and search for different math functions. I showed you guys a few here, and I would say the ones that we looked at here are probably the most commonly used, but there's a bunch more. And like I said, you know, there's tons of documentation on all of this stuff. So you can just look up, you know, math functions in Python, and there's gonna be tons and tons, like lists of these things that you can use inside of your programs to perform different math operations. But for now, that's just been a little bit about using numbers, a little bit about doing, you know, certain math operations and using functions with those numbers.